This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Good. Okay, thank you so much, Rabbi and Rebbetzin Bausk, for inviting me back to address this wonderful congregation. First time I was here, I received such an enthused introduction from the Rebbetzin that I was really excited to come back here and experience that introduction again, and here I am. Before I begin, I must issue a very stern warning. What you're going to hear today is not what we call feel-good fluff. What you hear today may shake you up a little bit.
Good.
It definitely will not be politically correct. I've come to speak the truth, as difficult as it may be to swallow, but one thing I know, I've been here before, I think you can handle it. And with that introduction, let us begin. Historically today, the 25th day of December, has not been a pleasant day for the Jewish people. Popular myth has the birth of the man who Christianity considers their God. Today, December 25th. According to the halacha, it's preferable. What? No, they claim it's his birth. But let me just say that according to the halacha, it's preferable not even to mention his first name, or even certainly his second name. So I will refer to him the way the Talmud refers to him, as Yeshu, or as the way Jews traditionally refer to him, as Yashka. But popular myth has the birth of this man, December 25th. The year either 1 AD or 1 CE, as it's called. But I must tell you that this popular myth has no bearing on reality. There is no serious Christian theologian who will tell you that JC was born on December 25th. Now, in terms of the year, and this is not what we're talking about today, but this is just by way of introduction. In terms of the year, the reason why they consider that he was born in the year 1 AD or 1 CE, it was a simple mathematical error of a Scythian monk by the name of Dionysius Exiguus, who, by the way, I do not know personally. He was unable to do the following task. Addition. He didn't get that. So he added the years wrong, and he came up with the year 1. But he was off by a couple of years. Let's talk about the date. According to the earliest Catholic documents, this man, JC, was considered to be born March 28th. March 28th. But there was some uncertainty regarding this date, and therefore the Bishop of Alexandria, Clement, who also I do not know personally, was not confident in the March 28th date, and instead he put his birth on the date November 18th. Fitzmyer, who is a cardinal today, he disagreed with both views. He said, not March 28th, not November 18th. And listen to the date he came up with, and it's today considered probably the saddest date in recent American history. Listen to the date he came up with, and then listen to what happened afterwards. September 11th. Wow. So this is considered the most authoritative date for the birth of Yashka. But everybody agrees, as they say in the Gemara, Kulei Amaloi Pligi, everyone agrees that December 25th is not the date of Yashka's birth. That's what December 25th is not. Now let me tell you what December 25th is. Historically, December 25th is the most tragic, catastrophic, murderous day that the Jewish people have suffered from historically, beginning from the times of the Romans, continuing through Christian Europe. You see, the Romans celebrated an 8-day festival, which they called Saturnalia, which began on December 17th. And what do they do on Saturnalia? And this is not, if you want to get a better picture of this, there's a lot of research you could do. But basically, Saturnalia was a barbaric, murderous, licentious, pagan holiday. And in the 4th century, when Christianity was trying to get going, they realized the only way they would be successful is if they would adopt the pagan holiday of Saturnalia. And many of the nasty trimmings of this holiday are merely adopted from the pagan customs of Saturnalia. Okay. Now, throughout European history, customs developed among the Jews on December 25th. First, let me tell you, there are many communities and many people today, they have a minhag, they have a custom, that the night of December 25th, they don't learn Torah. They don't study Torah. The simple reason being, they wanted to keep people off the streets, keep them out of the shuls. Because a Jew that was caught in the streets December 25th was as good as dead. The mikvahs, the ritual baths were closed. You could imagine why. Everybody knows. Any Jew who's familiar a little bit with Christian history, when they hear the mention of today's holiday, they are sickened, appalled, their stomach turns, their blood boils. This was the most dangerous day of the year. And you should know that as late as the 18th and 19th centuries, in Rome, the rabbis of the Jewish ghetto in Rome were forced to wear clown outfits and march through the streets being pelted by missiles and jeers of the crowd. In 1836, the Jewish community of Rome sent a petition to Pope Gregory XVI to stop the annual Saturnalia brutality and mockery of the Jewish people. And let me quote to you what his response was. His response was, "It is not an opportune time to make any innovations right now." 1881, December 25th. Christian leaders whipped the Polish masses into a frenzy. In Warsaw, dozens of men were murdered. Hundreds of women were raped. This was a classic European Xmas celebration. So for a Jew who knows anything about history, when they hear the mention of today, it causes the Jews' blood to boil. It causes their stomachs to churn. And you say, "Rabbi, are you living in the 19th century, in the 18th century? Times have changed. Good morning, America. We live in a country of religious tolerance. This is the culture of our fellow citizens. This is the culture of our countrymen. We shouldn't talk this way about our country's culture. Haven't times changed?" And what I would like to bring to your attention today is that yes, times have changed, but the challenges that we confront today are not any less virulent and challenging to the existence of our people than they ever were. And in order to appreciate this, I would like to draw your attention to the great confrontation between our patriarch, Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, and his brother, Esau, the progenitor, the patriarch of Rome, of the Western world. Okay, so you ready? You ready for this confrontation? Yaakov Avinu is returning to the Holy Land. He's returning to his brother Esau. Yaakov Avinu had been away from his family for 22 years. And Esau was coming to kill Yaakov. He was coming with 400 men. And the pasuk says, the verse tells us, that Yaakov Avinu offered a prayer. And Yaakov Avinu says, "Hatzileni na miyad achi miyad Esau." Please God, save me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. And the commentaries, most notably the Beis Halevi, Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, he asked that the words of the verse are redundant. Why say Hatzileni na miyad achi miyad Esau? Save me from the hands of my brother, from the hand of Esau. He only has one brother. Just say, save me from my brother, or save me from Esau. Why? Miyad achi miyad Esau. And the Beis Halevi offers the following explanation. That Yaakov Avinu was afraid and concerned of the two different faces that our enemy has. The two different faces of Esau. That throughout our history, wherever we are, we encounter one of these two faces. First, let's discuss the first concern of Yaakov. The violent face of Esau. The Esau of hands of dripping blood. The Esau that comes to destroy us. The Esau of 1492. The Esau of the Inquisition. The Esau of Kristallnacht. The Esau of the concentration camps. The Esau that has the innocent blood of our children on his hands. This is the Esau that we have become all too familiar with. If you go today to Theresienstadt, which is a concentration camp outside of Prague, and today they turned it into a museum, and you could see there the great oven where they cremated thousands of bodies and pulverized them and turned it into ash. You could see the great medical room with a table made out of porcelain, with various medical apparatus and medical utensils used by sadistic doctors, the likes of Mengele. But my grandfather, should live and be well, saw in the camps. In order to do experiments with men, women, children, in the most perverted, inhumane way. And then you go outside of the camp and you see train tracks. Where do these train tracks lead to? They lead to hell on earth. Direct stop to Auschwitz, where millions of Jews were burnt. Hashem Yimkom Dama. Now, if I may digress for a few moments, just to offer some perspective on the Holocaust before we proceed. And I just want to tell you that I'm not here to offer reasons or explanations, because whatever we say will fall short of human comprehension. But allow me to provide the following perspective. In this week's Torah reading, this week's Parsha, Yaakov Avinu is headed down to Mitzrayim. He's headed down to Egypt. No doubt it was a bittersweet moment for Yaakov Avinu. On the one hand, he's being unified with his son, Yosef. Yosef had been away from home for 22 years. For the last 22 years, Yaakov thought Yosef had been torn apart by a wild animal. Yaakov Avinu, he is so joyous to be reunited with Yosef, to the point where Vatechi Ruach Yaakov Aviem, he is revived physically, spiritually. So he's going down to be reunited with his beloved son, and on the other hand, Yaakov Avinu knows that by going down to Egypt, you know what's starting for the Jewish people? 210 years of bondage, 210 years of slavery, physical torture, Shibud Mitzrayim, Va'avadam, V'inu Oisam. No doubt this was a very bittersweet moment for Yaakov. Yaakov knew not just physical torture, but spiritual descent. You know that Mitzrayim, Egypt, was called Ervas Haaretz. It was the most degenerate society on earth. And Yaakov knew that if the Jews were to spend an added moment in Egypt, they would fall to the spiritual point of no return. So on the one hand, Yaakov Avinu is ecstatic. He's exhilarated. He's going to be reunited with Yosef. And on the other hand, he's afraid of the future of the Jewish people. God comes to Yaakov and he says, Yaakov, Al Tira Merda Mitzrayim. Don't be afraid. And Hashem offers him the following words. The Yosef Yashis Yadav Aleinecha. Yosef will put his hands on your eyes. What in the world is that supposed to mean? Here Yaakov Avinu, on the one hand, he's joyous. On the other hand, he's frightened. And God says, don't worry, Yosef will put his hands on your eyes. What is that supposed to mean? How does that shed light on this turmoil of Yaakov Avinu? And let me share with you now one of the secrets of the Torah. Because the Zohar HaKadosh, which is the holy mystical work of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, the Zohar HaKadosh, the Holy Zohar, comments on this verse, the Yosef Yashis Yadav Aleinecha, that the verse that God promises Yaakov, that Yosef will put his hands on your eyes, he says three words, the Zohar. Da Raza the Kriya Shema. This is the secret of Shema. The secret of Shema is Yosef putting his hands on the eyes of Jacob, on the eyes of Yaakov Avinu. What's that supposed to mean? There's a sefer, which is in my car right now. It's called Kol Aryeh. The sefer Kol Aryeh was written by Rabbi Avram Yehuda Cohen, the Rav of the city of Mad in Poland. And he suggests the following. In life, we have moments that are joyous, we have moments that are happy, we have moments that we are ecstatic. And then unfortunately there are times in life when we see tragedy, when things are not going well. When to our physical eyes it looks like this is punishment, this is strict judgment, this is din. There are two types of moments in life. Happiness and unfortunately the opposite. But as a believing Jew, we have a tradition. And it goes like this. Kol man de'avid rachmana letavavet. Which means whatever God does is for the best. Even something that to our eyes of flesh and blood, it looks tragic, our tradition is that whether we understand it or not, or whether we could recognize it or not, whatever God does is for kindness. Whatever He does is for the best. It says the Sefer Kol Aryeh, that is the main function of reciting Shema. Did you ever notice when you pray and you refer to the name of God, God has two names, Yud Kei Vav Kei and Elokim. These two names of God really reflect two different attributes of Hashem. Yud Kei Vav Kei refers to God's attribute of mercy, Rachmanos. Elokim refers to God's attribute of strict judgment, of punishment. When we say Shema, you know what our intention is? Shema Yisrael. Listen, Jewish people. Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei. It doesn't matter if to our eyes it looks like God is being kind to us. Elokeinu. It doesn't matter if to our eyes God is dealing with us very strictly. Hashem Echad. There is one God. And He does everything for one purpose, for kindness. And even though we may not recognize it, and even though we may not see it, and even though we don't perceive it, Hashem Echad. All that God does is l'taiva. And the question is, but it doesn't look that way. It doesn't seem that way. With our eyes of flesh and blood, it sure seems that sometimes God is dealing with us with mercy, and sometimes He's dealing with us with strict judgment. Says the Sefer Kol Aryeh, so what do? We cover our eyes. And we say, God, we're not looking at things the way it seems to our eyes of flesh and blood. We ignore human perception. We ignore our limited view. And we say, Ribono Shel Olam, we cover our eyes. And we say we don't care how things look superficially. Superficially it looks like sometimes things are merciful, sometimes they're strict. Hashem Echad. We suspend human judgment and we declare with conviction everything that God does is for kindness. Says the Sefer Kol Aryeh that Hashem tells Yaakov, don't be afraid to go down to Egypt. And Yaakov says, don't be afraid. It's going to be tragic. 4/5 of the Jewish people will be wiped out in Egypt. My people are going to descend spiritually. God says, no, I'm doing it for a great purpose. And you know how you could believe that what I'm doing for you is for a great purpose? The Yosef, Yashis, Yadav, Aleinecha. Yosef will put his hands on your eyes. Cover your eyes. Don't look at things the way they seem to your eyes of flesh and blood. It doesn't look like it's for kindness, Yaakov, but you need to close your limited vision. And you know who can help you do that? You know who could teach you how in life sometimes close your eyes to the way things look and try to take in the ideal that whatever God does is for the best. The Yosef! What happened to Yosef? Yashis Yadav Aleinecha. That could teach you to close your eyes. Look at what happened to your son Yosef. Yosef was kidnapped. He was sold to Egypt. 22 years he was separated from your family. You thought it was the greatest tragedy in history. Yosef thought it was the greatest tragedy in history. Yosef is away from his father, away from his family, in the most depraved society in the world. And look what I did for you, Hashem says to Yaakov. Yosef is now the second most powerful man in the world. Yosef controls the world economy. Look how, through the events of Yosef, I'm able to show you that even though to your eyes of flesh and blood it looks strict, it looks harsh, Yosef could help you perceive that things are not the way they look. This is the meaning of Shema. This is the secret of Shema. What's the secret of Shema? You close your eyes and you say, God, I trust that not everything in this world is the way it looks to my limited vantage point. There's a rabbi who lives in my neighborhood. His name is Rabbi Yonasan Sachs, who's Rosh Hashiva in Beis Medrash Talmud. And he was once invited to speak in Lublin, in Poland, to be the maschil, the beginner of Shas. You know, Jews all over the world, they learn a page a day of Daf Yomi, a page a day of Talmud. And over the course of 7.5 years, they finish the whole cycle of the Gemara, the whole Talmud, the whole Shas. It's a 7.5 year cycle, 1 page a day. This cycle of Daf Yomi began by Rabbi Meir Shapiro, the great rabbi of Lublin. And Rabbi Sachs was invited to come back to Lublin in Poland. By the way, the yeshiva that Rabbi Meir Shapiro founded was turned into a hospital by the Polish. And Rabbi Sachs was invited to come back to Lublin, and he was honored with beginning the Talmud right where it started. Okay, so he led this group, and from there this group was taken to Auschwitz. And Rabbi Sachs was asked to address the assembled group at the gates of Auschwitz. What's any rabbi going to say at the gates of Auschwitz? What could you possibly say? So Rabbi Sachs said over this comment of the Kol Aryeh, that in this world, we can't always view things the way it seems to our eyes of flesh and blood. That even though it looks, sometimes you need to close your eyes and accept the yoke of heaven. That's the power of Shema. From there, they went from Auschwitz and they traveled to the city of Mad. They walk into a palatial shul, magnificent shul. They walk into the shul, and in the shul there was a big bookcase encased in glass. And they open up the glass bookcase, and in this bookcase there is one book, one Jewish book. And this Jewish book was the Sefer Kol Aryeh by Rabbi Cohen. And Rabbi Sachs asked, why is this of all books? Why is this the only Sefer, the only book in this bookcase? So they told him, because Rabbi Cohen, the Kol Aryeh, was the rabbi of this shul in Mad. And this is the address he gave his Kehillah in their last moments to strengthen them. That the power of Shema is V'Yosef Yashis Yadav Aleinecha. What's the power of Shema? That Yosef teaches us that in life not everything is the way it appears to our eyes of flesh and blood. Coming back to Theresienstadt and the concentration camps. This was the face of Esau that Yaakov was worried about. And you should have no doubt in your mind that when Yaakov is confronting Esau, Yaakov sees Hitler. You say, what? Yaakov sees Hitler? Well, don't take my word for it. If you take a look on your sheets, in number 1, your first source, the Gemara, the Talmud, and Masechta Megillah, on Daf Vav Amud Aleph, on page 6. The Gemara says, as Yaakov is confronting Esau, Omer Yaakov, on the second line, Lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yaakov says to God, Ribono Shalayla, Master of the universe, Al Titain LeEsav Harasha Tavas Liba. Don't give Esau his heart's desires. You know what Esau's heart's desires are? Annihilation, murder, the final solution. Zimamai al tafek. Don't take off Esau's muzzle. Don't take off his leash. Don't take off his bridle. And the Gemara says, who is Yaakov afraid of? Look carefully. Zu Germania shel Edom. Yaakov was afraid of Germania. You say Germania, there is no such country in the world. Germania. Well, if you turn to the back of the Talmud, there's a commentary there called Hagois Yaivitz, the footnotes of a rabbi, Rabbi Jacob Emden, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who lived 150 years before the Holocaust. By the way, the Vilna Gaon makes the same comment. The Vilna Gaon's comment you have on your sheet in number 3. But I'm going to tell you what Rabbi Yaakov Emden says. Germania, Rabbi Yaakov Emden wants to know, where on the map is Germania? Kimiduma li, it seems to me. Rotzel Omar, what the Gemara, what the Talmud means to say, not Germania, Germania. Ashkenaz Shelanu. Ashkenaz is German. So here you have it. It's in the Gemara. The Gemara says explicitly that when Yaakov was encountering Esau, you know who Yaakov was afraid of? Germany. 3,500 years before World War II, Yaakov prays to God, God, keep Germany in check. Shalom mole, heim yoitzim, machrivim, es kol ha'olam kulai. If Germany would go out, they would destroy the whole world. Says the Gemara, how do you keep Germany in check? What is Germany's muzzle? And the Gemara tells us the answer. Listen carefully. The Amar Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina. Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina says, Telas Meya Katiri Taga Ika Begarmamya Shaladin. There are 300 crowned heads in Germany. Okay, you got it? How many leaders of Germany are there? 300. Utelas Meya Vishitin V'chamisha Marzavni Ika Beroimi. And there are 365 chieftains in Rome. So you have 300 in Germany, 365 in Rome. Uv'chol yoima nafki hani lapi hani. And every day they clash. Umiktil chad minayu, and they kill one of them. Umitradi lo'ukmi malka, and they're busy appointing a king. This Gemara is earth-shattering. The Gemara is telling us 2 historical pieces of information. That there are 2 ways to keep Germany in check. Number 1, how many crown princes are in Germany? 300. Imagine a country with 300 presidents. Right? The Gemara is saying the only way to keep Germany in check is they cannot be united. As soon as Germany is united, they're a danger to the world. And number 2, Germany fights with Rome. When they fight with Rome, they're safe. Everyone is safe. As long as there is contention between Germany and Rome, they're preoccupied. But as soon as Germany allies with Rome, they could go out and destroy the world. Now let me read to you from the Hebrew Encyclopedia. Excuse me. Look at number 5 on your sheet. This is from The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shiur. By the end of the Middle Ages, which had seen Britain and France emerge as unified nations, Germany remains a crazy patchwork of some 300 individual states. Just confirming that what the Gemara said 1,500 years ago, that there are 300 crown princes in Germany, is correct. That's our tradition. What happens? 1871. Bismarck comes and starts to unite the Germanic republics, setting into motion Germany's eventual attempt to take over the world. But, very good, Germany is united. But they're against Italy. And if there's contention between Germany and Italy, Germany is held in check. Well, World War I, Italy begins the war neutral. Eventually, Italy joins the Allies. Oh, Germany is against Italy. Germany loses the war after a few years. But then Hitler rises to power. And the first thing he does is he begins to reunite the Germanic republics, annexing one territory after the other. And his generals say, the world will never let us do this. This is crazy. It's suicide. Hitler says, this is what we're going to do. But then Hitler does something unusual in world history. He joins forces with Mussolini, with Italy. The Italians, they know how to make pizza. But they can't fight to save their lives. The last army you want on your side are the Italians. Maybe they can make pasta for you, but you don't want them fighting for you. And not only that, Hitler broke practically every treaty he ever made with any country, with the exception of Italy. What Hitler was saying, I could take on the United States, I could take on Russia, I could take on the Soviet Union, but not those Italianos, those guys I can't take on. Because Hitler understood that the muzzle, the bridle of Germany is Italy, and as long as he's allied with Italy, Germany will destroy the world. And how curious it is that somehow after the war, the world recognizes that a unified Germany is a dangerous Germany. And what does the world do? They divide Germany east and west. Somehow, intuitively, the world recognizes that the muzzle of Germany is their disunity. And Hitler's plan was to destroy the world. Hitler made his way to the Middle East. His army was in Egypt. So can you imagine the Jews living in Israel, how they felt as the blitzkrieg is coming up, North Africa into Egypt, and they're at the precipice of Israel. And the Jews in Israel were fasting, praying, saying slichos. And the Arabs were broadcasting on the radio, Jews, we're going to swim in your blood. We're going to molest your wives. We're going to murder your children. Because the Arabs had an alliance with Hitler. And you should know, I found in my grandfather's notes, in his personal notes, that when he was in Auschwitz, he saw Eichmann. And Eichmann invited a special guest to join him in Auschwitz, to watch Jews being tortured. Eichmann invited the Mufti from Jerusalem. And my grandfather saw Eichmann and the Mufti sitting together laughing when Jews were being beat in a way that would stop them from ever having children again. That was their entertainment. Yemach shemam v'zichram. God should wipe them out. So the Arabs had a relationship with Hitler. He was only a few miles away. And Yaakov Avinu had offered a prayer. God, don't let Germany go forth. And at the last moment the miracle happened, Hitler called back his soldiers. Historical fact. After the war they interviewed the German soldiers and they said, we don't know what happened. God was with the Jews. He said, well, God was with the Jews. How's God with the Jews? They said, we were stationed a few miles from Palestine. And at that time the British had the mandate in the Middle East. And the German soldiers were very thirsty. They were in the desert. And they tapped into the British pipeline. And only a few days before, the British were testing the pipeline. But instead of running fresh water through the pipeline, they led seawater. And the German soldiers drank the seawater. And they became so famished and thirsty and fatigued that it broke their morale and they went back to fight the Russians. Nes Gadol Haya Sham. This was all from the prayer of Yaakov Avinu. But let me tell you, my dear friends, there was another face of Yaakov, of Esau, that Yaakov was worried about. He doesn't just say, Hatzileni na miyad Esau. He says, Hatzileni na miyad achi. Save me from the Esau that appears as a brother. The Esau that appears with fraternity and friendship. This is another tactic of our enemy. And I say this deliberately. This is a tactic of the nations of the world. This is the Esau that appears with a smiling face. He allows the Jewish people to have freedom. He allows us to live in peace. This was the tactic of Napoleon. When Napoleon marched through Europe, announcing liberté, égalité, fraternité. where he allows the Jewish people to join the European nation as one. After thousands of years, finally the Jewish people are not inferior. Now they're considered equal. They enter universities. They enter government. They become doctors. The Jews welcome the newfound freedom. They thought this was positive for our people. But there was a rabbi, and his name was the Baal HaTanya, Rav Shneir Zalman of Liadi. And Rav Shneir Zalman of Liadi prayed that Napoleon should fall into the hands of the Tsar of Russia. The Tsar of Russia? The Tsar was a tyrant. He was vicious. He was cruel. He made decrees of brutality against the Jewish people. Why would the Baal HaTanya pray that Napoleon should fall into the hands of the Tsar of Russia? Said the Baal HaTanya, they're both dangerous to our people. But at least under the Tsar of Russia, we'll be tortured, we'll be brutalized, but we'll die as Jews. But under Napoleon wanted to homogenize European Jews. He wanted to create a big melting pot. And in a melting pot, people melt. And the Jews began to shed religion. Said the Baal HaTanya, the Tsar of Russia is the lesser of the two evils. This is what Yaakov Avinu was saying. Hatzileni na, not only from the vicious Esau, miyad achi, from the Esau of fraternity. And I ask you, my dear friends, which Esau is more dangerous? And I think it's pretty clear from the verse in the Torah. Which Esau does Yaakov pray for first? Hatzileni na miyad achi. The first Esau that he's worried about is the Esau of friendship, the Esau of fraternity. Yaakov's greatest concern, more than Germany, was America. And even though it seems harsh to say such a thing, 6 million Jews were murdered, were massacred in Europe. In 1940, 6 million Jews gave up their lives. Al Kiddush Hashem. They died saying Shema Yisrael. They died with the name of God on their lips. They died cleaving to the Creator of the world. They all go straight to Gan Eden Ha'elyon, to the highest place in heaven, because they were killed only because their last names were Cohen and Levy and Goldberg and Weinstein. They go straight to the world to come. Yesh lahem chelek la'olam haba. A big share in the world to come. But here in America, in the post-Holocaust era, we live in what's called Malchus Shel Chesed, a kingdom of kindness. We have freedoms. And right now we are enjoying one of those freedoms. The freedom to congregate. The freedom of religion. We can talk openly about Torah, about God. We have cameras. We have recorders. The KGB is not monitoring what we say. We could translate every line of our Talmud. We could sell it. We could proliferate it. Never in history have the Jews been afforded such an open tongue, such an open pen. We live in a Medina Shel Chesed. We could give money to Torah institutions and get a tax deduction.
Not anymore.
Can you imagine that? That means Torah institutions are recognized. We could donate a Torah to a synagogue, and we could stop traffic and get police protection. Let this continue. But with these freedoms, we could also go to their colleges and universities and become part of their society and become part of the country. No more do you see signs on restaurants that say no dogs or Jews allowed. To the contrary, Jews are invited into government, into business, finance. We have access everywhere, and as Jews we love it because for so many thousands of years we're inferior. But in our times, there is another Holocaust taking place. And this Holocaust There are not too many books written about it. There are no museums in Washington, D.C. memorializing and commemorating this Holocaust. This Holocaust is called the Silent Holocaust, where unfortunately 6 million Jews have already disappeared from our people in the United States of America. They have intermarried, left the faith, defected, and married out of the religion. Today in the United States of America, 70% of Jewish weddings are to non-Jews. 7 out of every 10 Jews that get married in our country are marrying Gentiles. This is the face of the brotherly Esau. Yaakov Avinu was more worried about this Holocaust than 1940. This is the one he prayed for first. And if anybody doubts that this is a tactic of Esau, let me remind you of the famous exchange between the Tsar of Russia and his nephew, Franz Joseph, the Premier of Austria. The Tsar writes a letter to his nephew. He says, "My dear nephew, the Premier, I know you to be no less of an anti-Semite than I am. Why then do you afford the Jews of your region freedom, liberty, rights? Wouldn't it be more prudent to treat them the way I treat them in my domain, with cruelty and punishment and penalty and taxation?" Franz Joseph writes back, "To my dear uncle, the Tsar of Russia, you kill your Jews your way, and I will kill them my way." When my grandfather was in the concentration camps, he would constantly be saying Tehillim, to the point he would be praying. I heard from an eyewitness that on one occasion he was hit over the head. He laid unconscious for about a day. He woke up and he continued to pray. And on one occasion, the SS officer beat him, and he said, "Rabbi, who are you praying to? You think the Jewish people have a future?" Listen to this. "There'll be no Jews left in Europe. We Nazis will decimate and destroy every last Jew in Europe. The Jews in Palestine, the Arabs will destroy the Jews in Palestine. And the Jews in America? Ha! The Jews in America will take care of themselves." So if anybody doubts that this is a unconcentrated effort, this is a tactic. This is the tactic of the fraternity of Esau, of the friendly face of Esau. That is mostly what Yaakov was worried about. And on that night, that dark night, over the river of Yabok, the Torah tells us Yaakov Avinu meets up with an angel, and a wrestling match ensues, and they're wrestling the whole night, and the angel sees that he will not prevail. So the verse says, "Vayiga bechaf yerechai." He strikes Yaakov Avinu in the hip socket, the sciatic nerve. And then the story continues, that the morning comes, Vayizrach lei hashemesh, the sun shines, Behu soileya al yerechai, and Yaakov is limping. Very interesting. At night, when the angel strikes Yaakov, he's not limping. Only in the morning when the sun shines, he's limping. Why wasn't he limping at night? So you say, Rabbi, it's like the NFL. When the player gets hit, he doesn't feel the injury right away. Not until Monday morning, then they realize he's injured. Right? It's like when you exercise, You don't feel it right away. The next day, your back hurts. That's what the Torah is telling. That Yaakov Avinu had Charlie horse and he didn't feel it right away. That's not what the Torah is saying. Comes along one of the great all-time rabbinic leaders, the Chassam Sofer. Says the Chassam Sofer a very amusing parable. There was once a wealthy man who was wearing a fur coat. And he's walking outside, and the sun and the wind, they get together and they make a little wager. And they wager amongst themselves, who will be able to get this man to take off his coat? So the sun says to the wind, "You go first, my friend." So all of a sudden, the wind starts to howl, starts to roar, starts to gust, gale force winds. And the more and the harder the wind is blowing, the more the guy grabs onto his coat and holds it tighter and tighter. It's counterproductive. The sun says to the wind, step back. Watch how it's done. All of a sudden, the sun comes out like today, 95 degrees. It's a picture-perfect day, and the sun is beating down on the guy, and he perspires and he sweats. And all of a sudden, he starts to remove one arm of the jacket, and then the other arm, and by the end of the day, he took off his coat. Says Rabbi Moshe Sofar, ding, 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 victory to the sun. The sun was able to get the guy to take off. He didn't even have to do anything. The guy took it off himself. These are the two faces of Esau. In Nazi Germany, they came at us like a tornado, with force, with brutality. But what happens when you come against the Jewish people? Like Haman, when Haman came to kill us, we fasted, we prayed for 3 days and 3 nights. We held on to the code of religion stronger. But in America, there's no more wind. And the sun is shining. And all of a sudden, we start to take off the jacket all by ourselves. In Germany, you needed a Gestapo to put a gun to your back to walk into the gas chambers. In America, the Jew does it on his own. Says the Chassam Sofer, that is exactly what happened to Yaakov Avinu. The nighttime represents the vicious Esau, the Esau of dripping hands of blood. And as Esau, the angel of Esau, is trying to strike Yaakov, Yaakov says, I don't feel that. I could recover from that. I won't suffer from that. I'll get up and walk the way I always did. I'm not worried about the Esau of the nighttime. But Vayizrach lo hashemesh, when the sun shines, and Esau puts down his guns and puts down his weapons, and now it's the smiling face of Esau. Vehu tzoileya al yerechai. That's a blow that's much harder to recover from. Now Yaakov Avinu is limping. So, my dear friends, we could suggest that if Xmas, historically, has been a day that posed an existential threat to the Jewish people, then we have to realize nothing has changed. Thank God our lives are not endangered. But the dangers that face our people today are no less than they ever were. The early fathers of the Reform movement, they tried to solve the age-old problem of anti-Semitism. You see, they did a study, and they understood what's anti-Semitism? Dislike of the unlike. You know why the Gentiles don't like us? Because we're not like them. We don't mingle with them. So, there was a man by the name of Geiger who wrote a new code of Jewish law, and in his code of Jewish law, he maintained Jews can now marry Gentiles. After all, why is there anti-Semitism? Dislike of the unlike. Well, now we're like them. Now we mingle with them. And then Hitler came along, and he reminded us of our Torah. And he made the Nuremberg laws. And those laws say that if you have any trace of Jewish blood, don't touch a Gentile. We needed Hitler to remind us. And now, for the first time in world history, instead of dislike of the unlike, in Germany you have dislike of the like. That for the first time in Judaism, where there was mass assimilation, you know, the early founders of Reform put in a petition to the Pope that they're going to cause mass conversion of Judaism. And in the very place where the assimilation began, now for the first time in history, instead of dislike of the unlike, you have dislike of the like, a new version of anti-Semitism. Let me tell you something very important. How does a Jew survive America? How does a Jew survive this exile? I'm going to tell you a little secret. If you look through the pages of Tanakh, of the scriptures, you find that the nations of the world are compared to a certain type of material. They're compared to water. Mayim rabim la yuchal lechablis esa'ava. The nations of the world are compared to a raging river. And what are the Jewish people compared to? V'haya beis Yaakov eish. The Jewish people are compared to fire. Let me ask you a simple question. Do water and fire mix? It's not a shidduch, as they say. They don't mix. Well, who wins? When water mixes with fire, who wins? Water extinguishes the fire. When Jews and Gentiles mix, Jews disappear every time. Any country in history that Jews began to mingle with Gentiles, we disappeared. That's what happens when water and fire mix. There's only one way for water and fire to exist harmoniously. And that is if there's a steel separation. You put the water in a pot. And when you put the water in the pot, not only could water and fire exist harmoniously, not only does the water not extinguish the fire, now the fire begins to activate on the water and influence the water and affect the water. You know, people say, how are we going to influence the world if we don't mingle with the Gentiles? The only way for a Jew to affect the world is to separate. Isn't that counterintuitive? You would think the more association we have with them, the more we can influence them. No, that's not how water and fire work. The only way for the Jewish people to be a light unto the nations is to do what we're doing today, where we gather in our synagogues, in our shuls, in our Torah centers, and we congregate, and we learn the Torah, and we separate. You would think, oh, the Gentiles are going to think we're so different, they're not going to like us. Just the opposite. That's when they like us. That's when they respect us. Uvagoyim! But when we mix among them, lo yischashav, we lose all value. It's the mystery of history. It's the paradox of history. How the more we keep our identity, the more respect we garner with the Gentiles. And now I'm going to tell you something that is not politically correct. You say, who do we think we are? This is elitist. Do we think we're better than them? After all, aren't we all the creations of God? Who do we think we are? Well, let me share with you a comment of the great Jewish philosopher Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, the author of Kuzari. And he says the following. Scientists and naturalists, they classify all matter into 4 categories. Number 1, doimeim, inanimate objects. Number 2, tsoimeach, matters that grow. Number 3, chai, living creatures. And number 4, medaber, speaking creatures. So number 1, we have doimeim, inanimate objects, rocks, stones, metals, water, jewel. Now, is a stone, is a piece of earth the same thing as a diamond? No, they're very, they have nothing in common, but they're all under the general category of inanimate objects. Number 2, you have tsoimeach, grass, bushes, trees, fruit trees. A blade of grass is very different than a majestic cedar tree, but they're all under the same category of tsoimeach, things that grow. Next, you have chai, living creatures. You have animals. You have mammals. You have insects. Is a mosquito similar to a lion? No. But they're all under the general category of chai. And then you have medaber, living things that could speak. Human being, a being of supreme sophistication. Says Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, there's a 5th category of matter that is so supreme and so elevated and bears no resemblance to any of the above mentioned 4, and that is the Jewish people. And whether you like it or not, this is the fact. This is one of the main principles of the Torah, that as day is different from night, And as holiness is different from profane, hamavdil bein kodesh l'choil. We say in Havdalah, the God who differentiates between holy and profane, bein or l'choshech, between light and darkness, that's the difference between the Jewish people and the nations of the world. It's a different category altogether. Don't feel meek, don't feel meager, you're the children of Hashem. You say, aren't we all the children of God? No. There's a principle in the Torah. Banim atem l'Hashem Elokeichem. All of man are God's creations. Only the Jewish people are God's children. And the way we preserve this distinction primarily is by studying Torah. In May of 1962, Adolf Eichmann was executed by the Israeli government. For 30 years, the identity of the executioner was left top secret, until the man retired 30 years later. As it turned out, Eichmann's executioner was a Jew, an Orthodox Jew of Yemenite descent. And the German television station tracks down the executioner. They say, could we please interview you? No problem, as long as you come to the shul, the kollel that I learned Torah in. Now these German interviewers, they had never seen a shul, they had never seen a kollel, and they come in and there's hubbub, there's noise, people are studying, people are learning, and they're arguing, and they're heated up in the discussion of Torah. And they said, why do you want to have the interview take place right over here in the kollel? Why don't you come down to our studios in peace and quiet? And Adolf Eichmann's executioner said, I want the German people to see why we survived. We survived because throughout our history, we always were devoted to the study of Torah. The study of Torah is the single most important way for a Jew to maintain their identity. And let me tell you one more thing. As important as Torah study has been for the last 3,300 years for the Jewish people, never has a time come that the study of Torah is more important than today. The Jewish people had left Egypt, and the verse says, the pasuk says, we walked for 3 days without water, we were very thirsty, and we complained. So the Talmud tells us, the Gemara tells us, you know what it means we went 3 days without water? It means we went 3 days without studying Torah. And when a Jew goes 3 days without studying Torah, his evil inclination starts getting him in a rebellious mode. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, instituted the following practice. That a Jew can never go 3 days without hearing the Torah read in the synagogue. And therefore, we read from the Torah on Mondays, Thursdays, and Shabbos. So I'll ask you a simple question. The Jews had left Egypt, and they went 3 days without studying Torah. What? They had just been in Egypt for 210 years, and they never studied a word of Torah, and they had no problem. And all of a sudden, they leave Egypt, and in 3 days already they need to study Torah. For 210 years, they don't have to study. And for 3 days, all of a sudden, now they have to study. Says Rav Simcha Wasserman, in Egypt, they beat us, they tortured us, they persecuted us. That was enough to remind us that we're Jews. But as soon as the Jewish people tasted freedom, and the sun was shining, a Jew who has freedom without Torah for 3 days is in grave danger. And as important as Torah study has been to our people, never has a time come when it's crucial and critical to make the number one priority of the Jew commitment to the study of Torah. And all of you who have come here today to give up of your leisure time on December 25th, the day that represents the best of American culture, the best America has to offer. And you've come here to study Torah. God bless you. I say to you, chazak ve'ematz, be strong. Give a pat on your backs. Keep up the good work. This is the most important thing that the Jewish people need. Come here as often as possible. This is the most important. You know, the verse that we're all familiar with says about the Torah, Eitz chayim hi lama chazikim ba. The Torah is a tree of life to those who grab onto it. Imagine somebody who fell into a raging river and they're in danger of being pulled down, down, down. And there's a tree that's growing by the riverside and extending out. What is the person going to do with that tree? They're going to grab a hold of the tree with all their might. Nobody has to say how foolish it would be. Imagine if somebody was saying, you know what, I'll try it left-handed with my pinky. You're in danger of being pulled down. No one has to tell anybody to embrace that tree with all their might. Well, that is what King Solomon is teaching us. This world, our society, our country, is a raging river that exerts a very powerful influence on us. It's threatening to pull us down, down, and bring us further away from Hashem. But there's a tree of life, and that tree is the Torah. How do we need to embrace that? Nobody has to say that it has to be embraced with all of one's might. And if we learn anything from gathering here together, is the attitude that we need to take towards the holy Torah of Hashem. That it's something that all of us have to embrace with all of our might and every fabric of our soul. Because this is our source of life. This is our source of connection to Hashem. So again, I wish all of you who have come today to embrace the Torah in your free time, and you've shown great love for the Torah and great love for God. May God bless all of you with the blessings of the Torah, with good health, with long life, with livelihood, with happiness, with everything you want. V'chol tov selah. Thank you all for listening, and have a wonderful...
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.